if you can't whip Parkinson's law daily, then just go ahead and give up because you're destined to be a slave. That's the bad news. The good news is that if you can whip Parkinson's law, you'll win by default because your peers cannot do it. Hey guys, welcome to Sound Banking. This is Kyle Reese.
And Raymond Ward. I wanted to start off. We were just talking, and Kyle says, "Hey, why do you start talking about this stuff before we get on?" And I said, "Well, I just like talking with you," and that's the truth. But I was saying that I've read this. It's page 28, Parkinson's Law, a bunch of times. It's a one pager. But this time, when I read Parkinson's Law in the book, Parkinson's Law, in which he brilliantly isolates some of the limitations of us all, particularly the behavior of individuals within a group. And for some reason, it just struck me today like, oh, yeah, we do tend to march along with a group, group think, as I would. But I envisioned, yeah, we do that. We're like sheep and we follow each other right off the cliff.
It's terrible.
And we also follow each other based on what somebody else has as an opinion about something. And I think it's good to, if you have a friend, a family member that has an opinion, that's great. But I guess ultimately, I feel like we should be going and doing our own due diligence on things that really matter, which finance is one of those. It's maybe, in my opinion, it's not necessarily the most important thing, but I think the most important thing is our relationship with our Creator, and number two, I actually think that our health is more important, because it doesn't matter how much money you have, you don't have your health. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but yeah, it just floored me when I read it just minutes before we jumped on. So
yeah, it
anyway.
reminds me of the herd mentality, right? And a lot of things have been logged in historical documents. We see them now. A lot of things happen, a lot of powerful things happen in mobs, and we tend to get swept up in the feelings and the emotions and the excitement of the people that are around us. It's another reason why surrounding yourself with good people who are going the direction you want to go is critical. It's absolutely critical. And so Parkinson's law, there's three elements to it. One of them is that work expands to meet the time envelope allowed.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. And the third one is that expenses rise to equal income. And he says at about halfway through this, he says, if you can't whip Parkinson's law daily, then just go ahead and give up because you're destined to be a slave. That's the bad news. The good news is that if you can whip Parkinson's law, you'll win by default because your peers cannot do it. Your peers cannot do it. This is why it's so important to get out of that herd. Move away from everybody who's going the same path as everyone else that you are associated with. I'm not saying to remove them from your family or to never talk to them again, but choose to spend less time with the people who are going the herd route, the mob route that's going nowhere. We already can see the future of that, right? We all know the future of the herd because it's been happening for so long. Step aside from that and surround yourself with other people who are willing to step aside, because when your peers can step aside from the herd and actually whip Parkinson's law, it makes it a lot easier for you to do that as well.
Right. Yeah. Collectively, whoever you're hanging around is having an influence on us, you know, including myself. So I want to hang around people that want to go, as you said, where I want to go. But hanging out with people that are like minded, and actually hanging out with people that are further along where you want to go.
Hmm.
They're further ahead and pick up on their tailwind. Uh,
Yeah,
so,
it's funny because people who are, uh, coat ta- coattailers, they ride other people's waves, all this other kind of stuff. It's viewed as a really negative thing, but honestly, if I can surround myself with people who already know how to catch the waves, and I can
mm,
follow them into that wave, then that'll get me a lot further, a lot faster, and that the further you go, the faster you get there. That gives puts you in a position to actually be able to help other people sooner. So I don't really see how that's a bad thing. I think it's only a bad thing when you try to take the other surfer down and try to be the only guy on the wave. And
yeah,
that scarcity mindset would suck. But outside of that, I think generally people paint what is a good thing as being bad. It's just really not.
yeah, yeah. It's not. I always seem to. It pops into my head is Jim Rohn. 45 years ago when I ran into him. He said, you want to you want to read. You want to read books. You want to be a reader. All successful people are readers. And one of the reasons you want to be a reader is because you could read a book and it could save you a year because it teaches you something.
Mhm.
So you're kind of borrowing that. There's nothing wrong with taking someone else's idea. I mean, geez, just think of it. That's what we're doing right here with IBC. We're Nelson Nash, just the one that paved the way for all of
Yeah.
us.
No
You know,
original content. It's all right here in becoming your own banker. We're just talking about it. You
right?
know.
Yeah. So to jump onto somebody's coattails, it can save you tons of years. Well, tons of years. That's a great word. The way to put that, express that. But it, yeah. So yeah, I don't see anything wrong with having somebody else come up with an idea and we run with it. So.
Yeah. So the first element of Parkinson's law is that work expands to meet the time envelope required or allowed. What Raymond, in your life, how have you seen um, maybe your relationship with procrastination? Has it gotten more over the years? Has it gotten less over the years? Have you ever struggled with it?
Yeah, and quite honestly, I still do. Um, but I'm more aware of it now. Um, and and per our previous comments just minutes ago, seconds ago, I'm continuing to read, and I'm reading I'm reading Road Less Traveled. Came out in 1978. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 10 years, over 10 years. And he talks about facing your stuff, things you need to do, um, and people that actually face and accept what comes to them do better in life. They're happier and all that stuff. So yeah, I still fight with it because there's so many things I want to do. So I say, oh, don't do that. I want to do this. That's more fun. And all that. So yeah, I have definitely gotten better with it. Um, but how about you?
Yeah,
How about
I was always an early riser since I've been young. I've always tried to get done with my responsibilities before noon so I could play, while the rest of the kids were doing their school. And
yeah, yeah,
and so I've always viewed myself as a go-getter, I guess you could say. Pretty self-determined. Um my what I've realized though as I was asking myself this question is like now that life is full. we've got the family now, 4 kids. We've got the business, growing business. We've got the podcast. We've got my mentors. Got church life, everything. There's just a myriad of things that are all day, every day, and I find myself working on the tasks whose deadlines are the soonest. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm literally, even though I'm not trying to procrastinate on these specific items, because I have all this other stuff in front of it, the priority level is just lower on these ones that have a longer date till the deadline. And the priority level for the things that have a sooner date on that deadline just go up. And naturally,
Mm.
if I was to mm, set a higher priority level on those things that have a further deadline, I'd work on them. It's just that I don't have to, so I don't. And it was really interesting for me because I've always viewed that one as something I don't necessarily struggle with a whole lot. But as I was doing a more accurate self analysis, I found myself a little bit humbled.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. um, what's his name? Dr. Benjamin Hardy talks about that very thing, about picking the things that actually have the biggest impact on your overall goals. Let's call it. That's not really the word I want to use, but picking the ones that have the biggest impact, and the other ones you'll get to them. But yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Um, so okay, what's the next one? Expenses.
Yeah, he talks about a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity.
Hmm.
This one's funny for me because I'm young, you're old, and I've never had a car that didn't have AC. Is
Oh,
that funny?
uh, I see it just as a generational thing because I had cars. My first car didn't have air conditioner. My I had a '68 Mercedes sedan. It did have 68. It had air conditioning, but I also
So
had
tell
a
me about
Ford.
that. Tell me about your first experience in an air conditioning car.
Oh, I felt like I was in luxury. Yeah, like you get like going to a wedding. I'd get into my Dodge Coronet and it had no air conditioning, and by the time you got to the place where the wedding was, you'd be soaked. If it was in the summertime because you sweat bullets. And but when I got the Mercedes, it had 1968, and it had uh, air conditioning. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. It was awesome. Um, yeah, and since I have to say, actually, I had a pickup truck in my landscape business. It didn't have air conditioning. I said, "Oh, I don't need that,"
That's funny.
because at the time it was an option.
Yeah.
That would have been in 1988, and I was like, I'm already spending too much on the truck. I didn't need that. Boy, I'll tell you, there were days when I wish I had had it.
Oh, I'm sure there were. My goodness.
Yeah,
One of the things I was considering as I was reflecting on this element of the law was how much easier it is for us when we are tempted to this. These are the human problems, right? We all struggle with this. A luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Some people struggle with it more than others. But isn't it easier? Doesn't it help if you're storing your capital, if you're storing your wealth just slightly out of reach, so you can't just swipe that credit card and buy that air fryer that everyone else has that made you some good fries at your friend's house this last night?
yeah,
Isn't it just easier?
yep, yep. The fact that you actually have to do something, request the loan to get that money, it gives you a chance to have that moment of pause
Yeah.
to say, do I really need to do this? Um, yeah, so yeah, I like that. I actually talk about that. I've talked about that with clients that it gives you a pause.
And at
Um,
the same time, it doesn't. take forever. It's not like you
Right.
mentioned requesting a loan. It's more like ordering a loan. You're not asking for it. You literally log on to your online platform if the company that you are working with has an online platform, and you say, send me my money. And if they don't have an online platform, you just call them and say, send me this much money.
Yeah.
And they do. There's no question about it. They just do. It takes, 3, 4, 5, 6 business days, maybe up to 10 business days on a really, really full month for them.
Yeah.
But it's not like you're having to go through this application process and take forever long to get your money. It comes relatively quickly, but you have to be intentional about ordering that. You can't just swipe that card.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
I think that storing wealth in IBC policies actually helps with some of that consumeristic stuff that he talks about in this portion of the law. The other element that he mentions is expenses rise to equal income. And I think this one's really interesting. I had a friend or acquaintance, someone said this several years back to me. They said when your income increases, increase your standard of giving, not your standard of living.
Love it.
That's been a challenge for me. Like, I've had to think about that a lot of times. And it's funny, it's not something I try to think about. I just think about it often. And it's funny, I reading this book, Think and Grow Rich, and Earl Nightingale says, what we think about, we become what we think about. And I've noticed that in myself, that as my income has been increasing, my thoughts go more towards giving than what can I do to increase my standard of living. And I don't know, for any of you that might be listening that finds that helpful, I'm happy I could just pass that along because it's improved
Hmm.
my life for sure.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so what else? What else do we want to say about this?
um, well, finances are relative. They're completely relative.
What do you mean
I
by that? What do you mean by that?
They're relative to what else is going on, right? Everything that you're doing in the financial world is compared to what your peers are doing. It doesn't matter if I have $1 million or $1. If everyone else has $1 million or $1, I'm the same, right? It's all relative. It's not how much you have, it's how much you have in comparison to others. The reason why whipping Parkinson's law sets you ahead is because most people can't. Most people can't whip Parkinson's law. Doesn't matter if we're dealing with infinite banking policies, with cash, with gold, real estate. It doesn't matter what we're even talking about. If you're willing to do what your peers are not able to do, or I should say, not willing to do, everyone's able to. If you're willing to do what they're not willing to do, you're going to be ahead in the financial world, period.
Hmm.
That's what's so great about the financial world. It just
Yeah.
calls into question how dedicated you are to seeing a better future for yourself, and why, right? It's not just about having a better future for yourself, it's about who you can impact. One of the questions I had, though, um, was at the end of this page. Nelson brings up that government official, and he says that the government official would come in, or would be sitting in his chair, and a, the youth would come in and say, we've got this problem and that problem, and top secrecy of this thing and that thing. And um, and then he would send him away, and he said, oh, one more thing. And the kid would turn around and say, remember rule 6. And the kid would say, yes sir, of course. And the young worker would reach the door and then turn back, having had another thought. But excuse me, sir, what is rule 6? Rule 6 is as follows: don't take yourself too seriously. And once more the youth would get to the door with his hand on the knob, and he would about to turn the doorknob, and he said, but sir, what are the other rules? He said, young man, there are no other rules.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because obviously this is saying, like, this is on the heels of Parkinson's law, that says work expands to meet the time envelope required. A luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity, and expenses to rise to equal income. All of these things are dealing with you have to be disciplined. You have to approach life very seriously. And then he finishes the page with don't take yourself too seriously. There are no other rules. And I'm just sitting here. I can't tell you how many times I have read this, and I am still saying, what, Nelson, was the point of this story? Because Nelson was intentional about everything. Everything. I talked to people who attended many of his webinars, and they said that it didn't matter where he was in the States. It didn't matter webinars, that's funny. This is way back when. Seminars,
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
seminars. He said it didn't matter where he was, he ran them the same. And he perfected that 10-hour seminar to the point where every pause was in the same spot. Every story was in the same spot. Every sip of coffee was in the same spot. Every joke was in the same spot. He was so intentional about what he said when he said it. And I'm still laughing at how out of place this feels, this story feels, but how appropriate it is. And I'm sure how appropriate it is. I'm sure one day I'll look back and say, oh my goodness, that makes sense now.
Yeah, I'll just share just a thought about that, because I thought about that, and thought he was, and maybe somebody that went to a lot of those seminars would actually know the answer to that question that you just posed. But I wondered if he was asking us to keep our ego in check. Um, like, if you do whip Parkinson's law, don't get all grandioso and all this, and if you don't whip it, don't beat yourself up over it either. So ego and humility, I think there's something to that effect in that, but I can't honestly say that I know for sure, right?
Well, I like what you said about that. That does seem to ring true. Parkinson's law comes up for me all the time. I see it everywhere. And it's funny, Nelson said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And he was talking about infinite banking. He was talking about opportunities. He's talked about a lot of things and used that phrase. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And Parkinson's law, out of all of the laws, is the one that I see most frequently. And I think that's why he mentioned you got to whip it daily. So this is a fun one to spend a little bit of time chatting about. I appreciate your thoughts. And I guess for everybody who's listening, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us on the Sound Banking Podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and click on the notification bell. Otherwise, join us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for more content.